Hey everybody, DM Gallibond here. This time on Lore Friday, we continue looking at Chapter 4 from Out of the Abyss. That's right, it's more from the Duergar city of Gracklstugh. This time, we're going to be focusing on Laduguer's Furrow and the East Cleft and West Cleft districts. Now, Laduguer's Furrow is a natural formation that bisects the city of Gracklstugh. And as with all of the adventures in this particular location within the campaign, this one is tuned for a party of Tier 2 adventurers at level 5. The theme for this particular adventure is to explore the Derro populated slums of Gracklstugh. The setting is the Duergar city of Gracklstugh, located on the shore of the Dark Lake. And the hook for this particular adventure is whether they're sent there to spy, or whether they are sent there to hunt a fugitive, or whether they are sent there to locate a missing item by one of several factions within Duergar. One of these factions has hired the PCs to travel to the Derro slums of Gracklstugh in pursuit of their goal. Now, before we go any further, if you've reached this far, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, and click that post notification bell so that you too get notified every time new content drops. This particular adventure allows the PCs to get a first-hand look at the inherent madness of the Derro race, and also lets them explore one of the more interesting geologic formations of Gracklstugh. Laduguer's Furrow is named for one of the Duergar deities. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And it was created by a natural disaster long ago. An ancient earthquake split the cavern that houses Gracklstugh, leaving a rift nearly 200 feet deep and 500 feet wide. Now, Laduguer's Furrow has a packed gravel floor and extends roughly a quarter mile in each direction beyond the natural walls of the city. So the central part of this furrow is what you see within Gracklstugh, but then imagining going beyond the caverns of Gracklstugh in both directions, the furrow continues. Each end of the rift has a steeply sloping floor carved with a set of stairs and a wide ramp for both pedestrians and wagons. Now, the top of the bluffs above the north and south rims of the furrow, which are known as the North Furrow and South Furrow districts, represent the residential district for most of the Duergar. But the clefts, or the east and west ends of the formation, are home to most of the Derro population of the city. Now, deep within the furrow, there are also many blocked-off entrances to another sub-level of the city, and that is called the Whorlstone Tunnels. And we will have another video in this series that talks all about the Whorlstone Tunnels and the various adventures that are found there. So the main civilized features of Laduguer's Furrow are the roads and the abandoned guardhouses. Primarily, guardhouses sit at the west end of the furrow, and they were used to quell and restrict the movements of the former Derro slave population in the West Cleft district. That is, until the grandfather of the current king liberated the Derro and made them citizens, allowing them to spread their homes to the East Cleft district as well. So these abandoned guardhouses are usually empty, and a party that somehow sneaks into Gracklstugh and avoids detection by Derro and Duergar alike may use one of these places as a safe haven to rest and a base of operations of sort for sorties and missions of exploration throughout the rest of the city. The East and West Cleft districts are among the most dangerous areas in the city for a party of PCs from the surface. As mentioned previously, all the Derro have an inherent madness that stems from the creation of their race by mind flayer geneticists doing evil experiments on Duergar and Svirfneblin they captured in the Underdark in ancient times. When Derro notice outsiders, they tend to fly into a murderous rage. That's just part of the breaks of being genetically engineered by mind flayers, I guess. And PCs can easily be mobbed if they're careless when exploring the East Cleft and West Cleft districts. Fortunately, however, the Derro are normally so preoccupied with squabbling amongst each other that they hardly notice outsiders, especially if the outsiders are sneaking around and being quiet about things. So one reminder for DMs is about the magical alarms that the Derro savants have put in place to warn them of incursions by Duergar guards. Remember, the Duergar, they have that innate ability to go invisible. Thus, the Derro savants are on the lookout for anybody sneaking around invisibly. So it's actually going to be better for a party, and depending on whether you're a nice GM or not a nice GM, you can let them know this. It's generally better for a party if they actually use stealth and don't try to sneak around invisibly. Because if they use stealth, they're not going to trigger any alarms, and they just may not be noticed by the Derro. If they use invisibility, they probably aren't going to be noticed, but they're very likely to set off alarms. This is something that you should keep in mind if you're running this campaign for a group of people at your table. The West Cleft District holds the most frequently used entrance to the Whorlstone tunnels, and when the PCs are sent there, or if they discover a need to explore those tunnels, it's likely they will need to enter the West Cleft in order to complete that task. This North Furrow district on the north rim of the Furrow also houses the Hall of Sacred Spells, and that is a temple of Diirinka, which is a Derro deity. And in this temple, the Council of Savants meet and plot their mad and often counterproductive schemes. So there are secret ways to get into and out of this location that the PCs will need to discover or learn through careful observation and questioning of council members or anyone with close knowledge of them. Before we get back to talking about more of the adventure proper, we're going to take a few minutes and we're going to look at these two entities that we've talked about. We're going to look at Laduguer and we're going to look at Diirinka. Laduguer is also known as the Exile, the Great Protector, and the Master of Crafts. He is the dwarven deity of the Duergar, and he was cast out of the rest of the Mordensamen, which is the pantheon of dwarvish gods that's led by Moradin. He's harbored a bitter resentment, viewing the rest of the pantheon as layabouts more concerned with outdated tradition than with progress. However, Laduguer's doctrine taught obedience to one's leader, empowerment through the exploitation of slaves, enrichment through the creation of magical weapons, and protection through an unforgiving military program. Laduguer is xenophobic, urging his followers to avoid contact with other races, save for limited trade and slave raids. He's very much a loner, but he does have a daughter, or it's rumored that he has a daughter, and that is a person named Deep Duergar. Even though she's his daughter, she hatched many schemes against him. His race's dominance over the trade of steeders gained Laduguer enmity of Loth, and he had ancient disputes with the demon prince Orcus. None of this stuff actually comes into play in the campaign, but this is some interesting sort of lore that comes from some semi-official sites. I'm actually using the Forgotten Realms wiki to pull up this information. This will allow you to sort of come up with some ideas of what is the Church of Laduguer like in Gracklstugh. This doesn't really talk anything about how Laduguer came to give his name to the big cleft there, but it would kind of make sense if that was where they threw the Derro, where they had their slaves and everything. It would make sense that they would name that Laduguer's Furrow after their deity. Now let's talk a little bit about the Derro deity named Diirinka. Diirinka is the god of the Derro. Derro are monstrous hybrids of dwarves and other humanoids. Now, I always like to think of them as hybrids of the dwarves and the Sverfneblin, but in some cases you may see that they are considered hybrids of dwarves and humans. It's up to you. It's your table, your game. Knock yourself out, whatever you want. Diirinka is a deity of magic and knowledge as well as cruelty. He resides in the realm called the Hidden Betrayal on Pandemonium's lair of Phlegethon. Diirinka was thought to be the son between Moradin and Baranar Truesilver, as well as a brother to many other dwarvish deities, including Clangeddin Silverbeard. He was banished by his father alongside his twin brother, although it's not ever made clear why Moradin banished him. Interestingly, worship of entities called Diirinka and Dinkarazan existed in Old Shanatar. So again, this is stuff that is found from the Forgotten Realms wiki, and it has no bearing on the actual plot of Out of the Abyss. But it is kind of a very interesting bit of lore that you might want to throw into your game if you just want to sort of get a sense of what the worship is like of the different deities that you encounter when you go to these places, especially if you have like a cleric or a paladin or something in the party, or someone who studies religious lore or whatnot. If you have somebody that has a lot of points in the religion skill, they would know a bunch of these things, so it's kind of nice to have this in your back pocket in case one of the players comes up and starts asking questions. You can use this to sort of fill out, well, if they go to a holy person, what is this holy person going to be like? If it's a Derro or if it's a Duergar. Hopefully that's helpful. The most common enemies that you're going to find in this particular adventure are, of course, Derro, because you're in their territory, their part of Gracklstugh. Now, the toughest potential encounter is going to happen by misadventure. The way this is written, you're really not going to have any set encounters. But the absolute worst thing that can happen for your PCs is if they trigger an alarm in the East or West Cleft district, and if they are attacked by an overwhelming mob of Derro. If they try to escape into Gracklstugh proper, they will not be able to avoid detection by Duergar guards, who probably will arrest them for disturbing the peace and be disinclined to listen to any excuses by troublemakers from the surface. So even if they had gotten on the good side of some of the factions, if they go causing trouble in these Derro neighborhoods, there's going to be quite a number of the guards that are like, yep, bunch of surface scum, going poking their noses in where they don't belong, causing trouble, making us do extra work. All right, well, these guys, I'll fix their little red wagon. So they would wind up getting into trouble both with mobs of Derro and with a bunch of the Duergar soldiers. There's no specific individuals or special items or special creatures that are encountered here, because this particular adventure just sort of lays out a setting, an area within Gracklstugh where certain other events take place, and it kind of gives you an idea of the layout and what is here. My favorite elements of this particular adventure are the descriptions of the slums of the East Cleft and West Cleft. And that's because these make an interesting thematic template for any kind of ghettos or favelas or other districts for an impoverished or marginalized second class of citizens in a fantasy city in one of your settings. There's a very interesting power dynamic and a relationship that is going on here within the Derro, and that is between the majority of the oppressed Derro, the vast majority of the oppressed Derro people, and their supposed leaders within the Council of Savants. These leaders are very rich, very powerful, but they also have a simmering resentment against the ruling Duergar class. if you think about it from a historical standpoint, this Council of Savants, at least to my reading, it seems like it may draw some inspiration from the New Testament Pharisees, if you will. So if you think about the Roman province of Judea, where the Jewish population was an oppressed and repressed group of people that were overlorded by the Romans, and the Romans were coming in and imposing Roman law, Roman traditions, all of these things, and taking over all of these historic and culturally significant areas and turning them into basically Roman office buildings, setting up Roman temples in this province, which was very offensive to the people that had this long tradition where this had been their land that had been given to them by their deity that they venerated. So then, among this group of the Jewish minority, you had these Pharisees. The Pharisees were wealthy, they were powerful, they were educated, and they had a certain status within the community. They were looked up to by the Jewish population. They also were held to account by the Roman overlords. It's like, hey, anything happens here, you guys, you keep those people in line, because if we have any problems, we're just going to go right to Caesar. Caesar's just going to strip all of your wealth, all of your property, all of your privileges, and you are just going to be down in a ghetto with all the rest of them. So, you just mind yourselves. And I kind of get the feeling that this Council of Savants is in a similar, occupies a similar position within the strata of society of Gracklstugh. You have the Duergar that are kind of the overlords, the master population. Yes, the Derro are a free people. They are no longer enslaved, but they're still marginalized, very much a second-class citizen. And then these Council of Savants, they're given privileges. They're given wealth. They're given opportunities. The price is they'd better keep those Derro in line. Because if they don't, the king is going to come after them for the problems of the Derro. So you can kind of see how this is set up that way, and that makes a really interesting dynamic for your cities in your homebrew games. Like if you want to have some sort of plot that is talking about an uprising from an oppressed underclass within the population. And you can sort of play with that whole power dynamic and let your party sort of see where the fault lines, where the strange alliances and loyalties, and, who among this leadership group of the underclass, who among them is more worried about keeping their privilege and keeping their wealth, and is willing to throw their fellow people to the mercy of the military, of the ruling overclass. That's kind of a fun little thing you can do there. A party that has a decidedly chaotic sensibility might come into Gracklstugh and might discover the underlying tension between the Derro and the Duergar, and they might just be inspired to poke the anthill, as it were, and upset the balance of power in Gracklstugh. And the consequences, what would happen if that takes place, that's something that you as a DM are going to have to decide for your game. The easiest homebrew adaptation is taking the theme of slums and their privileged leaders and incorporate that into any kind of sizable fantasy city, especially one where there's like a vast majority population of one race or one culture, and then you have a minority sort of underclass of a different race or a different culture. You can use this with other editions of the game because Derro have been around since first edition, so it works well with any edition of the game. All right, and that is going to do it for our look at Laduguer's Furrow and the East and West Cleft districts. I have been DM Gallibond, and before we go, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, click the post notification bell, and we will be back next time when we will look at Cairmgorm Cavern, which is the place where you will find all of the stone giants in Gracklstugh. All right, everyone, take care. Good night.